Pleasure.
And then I would like to thank Zoel, who again is our Youth Advisory Board facilitator for this morning. And then to our speaker. It is such a pleasure to introduce to you President Boris Tadic. I'm going to give you a little bit about his background and then just a little personal plug before I pass it to him to kind of share with you his experiences. But President Tadic was first elected president of Serbia in June of 2004 and was reelected for a second term in February 2008. While in office, he was instrumental in consolidating Serbia's democracy and became an international spokesman for the new Serbia. While president, he actively promoted the de-Balkanization of the Balkans by taking the initiative in regional reconciliation efforts and has vigorously reforged strategic partnerships between Serbia and the United States. There's so much more to his story and his legacy, but I just personally want to say the first time that I had the opportunity to meet him was at the Nizami Ganjavi International Center meeting about 3 years ago in Azerbaijan. And when you first meet him, you know that he's a voice for all that is fair and just in this world. And then 2 years ago, we had the great pleasure of having him speak to some of the students in New York City before our gala. And again, just knowing his history and the alliances that he's forged and how he has pushed for peace and reconciliation really transformed some students. And to this day, I will always remember one student sending me a note after that meeting, President Tadic, and he said, listening to you and meeting you was the highlight of his high school career. You are a voice for all that we need in this world. And so it is such a great, great pleasure and honor to introduce you to our participants today and to pass it to you. So everyone, President Boris Tadic.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very important session. And at the beginning, I would like to start with some of my experiences during the reconciliation process in the former Yugoslavia. Maybe not everyone is aware that in the former Yugoslavia, we had so many atrocities during the war after deforming former Yugoslavia. And finally, my country, Serbia, has been bombed by NATO in 1999, which means the whole decade in the 90s, we spent in the war, in the horrible atrocities, aggression, and in an extremely difficult situation. Outcome of all that facts was a big problem and a huge problem between the countries that started to become independent countries from former Yugoslavia. At the same time, troubles in terms of ethnic relations between people living in the Western Balkans, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is formed by 3 ethnic groups, Serbs, Bosniaks, and Croats. And finally, that was a very significant and very difficult problem for my country, Serbia, regarding participation in international forums and organizations because of everything what happened during the war in the former Yugoslavia. Our topic is to talk about international diplomacy, about respecting human rights and the process of reconciliation. And this is why this is kind of irony that I'm very experienced in these 3 topics. Unfortunately, I'm experienced because I became a president after everything what happened, trying to work on reconciliation process, respecting human rights, and solving so many outcomes and troubles we've been facing with after wars in the former Yugoslavia. We had firstly very short war between Yugoslav army and Slovenia, which intended to become independent states from Yugoslavia. And after that, the dialogue between leaders, in that time leaders, Mr. Izetbegovic from Bosnia, Mr. Tudjman from Croatia, Mr. Milosevic from Serbia, started to be very negative, and so many hostilities we saw in that time between them. And finally, Croatia decided to go towards independency. After that, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia was intending to create kind of Yugoslavia, smaller Yugoslavia, but the outcome of everything was a really horrible war that happened in the countries that I mentioned, in the former republics of former Yugoslavia. What was created even more complicated situation, which was very difficult to be understood by some international interlocutors, that is a fact about our ethnic structure. Croats has been living in Serbia, Serbs has been living in Croatia, Bosniaks in Serbia, Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croats also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and usually people that came from foreign countries, foreign institutions understood that in Croatia are living Croats, in Serbia Serbs, in Bosnia Bosniaks. But this is not the case in my form. That wasn't my case in my former country, and that was quite a difficult situation even to be well explained to international interlocutors. I'm going to use my own example. I was born in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, nowadays capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. My grandmother was born in Croatia. My father was born in Montenegro. Finally, I became a Serbian president. I spent first 5 years in my life in Bosnia and Herzegovina. After that, my parents came to Serbia, being professors on university, and I started my real and serious life in Serbia, and finally I became a president of Serbia. So many people in the former Yugoslavia had the same situation and same experience, same destiny, and that was really very complicated to explain to all of us, to ourselves, but not only to international interlocutors, our difficult situation. I am ethnically Serb, even though my grandmother is from Croatia, my mother is from Bosnia, my father is from Montenegro. We are originally Serbs, but we had so many people that came from mixed marriages, and that was issue of identity. The issue of identity that I would like to underline right now is extremely important issue that is underestimated in international arenas for many, many decades. And unfortunately, that kind of the approach to the issue of identity created so many tensions all around the world. Unfortunately, we didn't respect enough issue of identity, and nowadays we see how that is important, not only in former Yugoslavia, Serbia, Croatia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also elsewhere in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, in different countries. Let me say my personal attitude regarding ethnicity and issue of identity in the former Yugoslavia. I started to explain these particular things to you because of trying to explain the nature and the real the facts about how conflict easily starting to be one of the critical moments in existence of different ethnic groups, even though there are not big and significant differences between those ethnic groups. In my view, Serbs, Bosniaks, and Croats and Montenegrians are same people. We have same genes. We have almost the same culture. We have the same way of listening music, playing sport. We've been living for almost 1 century together, even without living together in 18th and the 17th century. We are connected because of speaking totally same language, even though we are calling that language differently. Croats are saying that they're speaking Croatian language, Serbs Serbian, Bosniak Bosnian language, and some Montenegrians now they started to explain that they are speaking Montenegrin language. That happened, that started to be our reality only few years ago. Before that, almost all Montenegrins has been explaining they're speaking Serbian language. This is how I'm explaining to you difficulties in terms of understanding the very specific and not big differences among the identities and ethnic groups. But even though we are almost the closest people in the world, we are kind of relatives. We are people that are understanding each other perfectly. That was maybe one of the reasons why the leaders in our republics has been insisting on conflict during the 1990s. And I'm extremely sad because of what happened, but at the same time, I have a kind of obligation to explain to everyone, all students, young people from all around the world, that even though some of people are living in the countries that are similar to former Yugoslavia, that are thinking that conflict is never going to come, but this is happening even overnight. And I'm one of them who was advocating the approach to our situation in the former Yugoslavia by saying the conflict is not possible because we are so close, we are kind of relatives, we are kind of brothers, and we are speaking same language, we understand our common existence in the same way, but that was big failure. Conflict came with a kind of big massacres, casualties, atrocities, and a horrible crimes during the war that created big tensions between ethnic groups. And even today, we feel that tensions as one of the biggest obstacles regarding creating a normal situation in the region of Western Balkans. This is why, finally, some of our countries are not member states even now of European Union. Some of them, for example, Croatia and Slovenia, became a member states in the past few years, but mainly Macedonia, that was country started to be independent from former Yugoslavia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia are not member states even now. We are some of us, Montenegro and Serbia, we are negotiating about membership. Now I'm coming to the issue of respecting human rights, which is, from my point of view, one of the most important issues and the foundation of our common civilization. During the war, we didn't have real respect of human rights. From the country which was pretty stable, like former Yugoslavia, even though that was a communist country, but we had a pretty stable situation, and if I may say, normal relations between ethnic groups. As I said, war started to be our reality overnight, after introducing a multi-party system in our countries, and after the national parties became extremely strong, even stronger than Communist Party in every single particular republic. The war started to be our reality, and but not war in a, if I may say, acceptable way. I mean, this is I'm trying to use irony right now. The war is don't has an acceptable way, but war that we've been facing with was horrible. One of the worst experience in European history after the Second World War. For sure, worst experience after Second World War. And specifically, that war happened among the people that are almost the same, with almost the same culture, so many similarities and common experiences during the former Yugoslavia, because we know each other, growing next to each other, being together during the vacation and the sport matches and in similar experiences. War started in a brutal way. War started in the way which is, even today, after 2 decades after war, we cannot understand really what happened if we are analyzing and making researches in the war reality. That was really horrible. If you are trying to explain this to the young generation nowadays, what happened 20 years ago in the former Yugoslavia, they cannot believe, because they are started to have a much better and enormous communication with the day friends from Serbia, with the day friends in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. I'm trying to explain to you these particular things because normal people cannot understand the worst reality of the human beings, and how is it possible to instrumentalize in the worst political way human beings, citizens of your country? How is it possible to navigate people to behave in a brutal way? This is unfortunately possible. And this is why prevention of the conflict is crucially important. And this is first the general statement that I would like to share with you. Prevention of the conflict is crucially important. And in that respect, politicians that are understanding importance of prevention of conflict, and politicians with a sustainable vision about their society and their neighboring societies are crucially important regarding peace in the world. And this is why unfortunately, we don't have a lot of politicians with that kind of capability to understand the reality in which they are living, to understand challenges they are facing with, and to understand the problems in terms of foreign policy and the foreign diplomacy their countries are facing with. But I would like once again to underline the importance of leadership with the vision, determination, and the leaders that are able to behave sometimes even totally differently that expectations are existing in their own countries, that are going to try to convince people, even a minority of people, to start to explain the significance of prevention and a peaceful policy and policy that is respecting all kind of identity that existing in their own countries. This is very, very important. And that is what I would like to share with you. Unfortunately, leaders in the former Yugoslavia, like Milosevic, Tudjman, Izetbegovic, I'm mentioning three of them, but also other leaders from Macedonia, Slovenia, and Montenegro couldn't understand significance about what I'm saying right now. They insisted on their own identity. They tried to promote themselves as a national heroes, nationalistic heroes, people that are playing a political game by using agenda of patriotism, so-called patriotism and nationalism, and they try to promote themselves as the defenders of their own ethnic group, which wasn't the truth. I'm really always very much afraid when I hear that someone is trying to start in politics and to appear in the political arena by saying, I'm patriot. I'm first of all patriot. I'm defending national interests of my country and something like that, which means many times those kind of politicians are behaving totally differently, and they are not respecting interests of other people. But the key issue is how to respect not only interests of your country, your ethnic group, but also neighboring countries and neighboring ethnic groups. This is what I would like to share with you. About what happened in the former Yugoslavia, we had more than 100,000 casualties. Unfortunately, we had a destruction among our ethnic groups regarding relations. We had a big problem with the missing persons, internal displaced persons, refugees. We couldn't suffer economically altogether such an outcome of the war, which happened in the former Yugoslavia. And we didn't have a trusting between people that were living and that are living in a very small region of Southeast Europe. I became a president in 2004. I became a president of Serbia, first democratically elected president of Serbia after Milosevic. And that happened only 1 year after assassination of first democratically elected prime minister of Serbia, Zoran Đinđić. Which means situation in my country, even we had democratic changes in October 2000 by defeating Milosevic on elections. 4 years after implementing the real democracy and introducing really democratically elected leaders, we didn't have a stable situation in our society. Also, I have to mention that we didn't have a stable democracy and political situation in our neighboring countries. For me, as a president, was one of the most difficult problems how to start reconciliation process. And my political philosophy was that if someone on behalf of your national group committed war crime or atrocity, that president even has to apologize. president of the country from where war criminals came. Even though I wasn't involved in a war, I was always against war as an opposition politician and a member of Democratic Party during the war, which was attacked by Milosevic regime so many times. And finally, people that were serving to Milosevic within the intelligence and the secret intelligence in Serbia were killing Zoran Đinđić, first democratically elected prime minister of Serbia. Just a year before I became a president of Serbia, I was trying to work on reconciliation process and to explain to our people living in Serbia that we have to apologize for war crimes that were committed by some people in the military, in police and intelligence structure of our society. I was apologizing not only for what people from Serbia has been doing during the war, but also for what some of my the Serbs that were living in the former Yugoslavia, but in Bosnia and Herzegovina has been, and Croatia has been doing during the war. I did it as a representatives of Serbs in a smaller international arena in the Western Balkans. I believe even today that kind of gesture is a crucially important regarding reconciliation process. This is that I understood that this is my moral duty. Many people in Serbia was challenging me by saying, why you are doing that if President of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina is not going to do the same thing? Why you are going to do that as a first president? I said, beside of historian analysis, who was guilty for war, what happened from Yugoslavia, all of us, Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, are having casualties and the victims during the war. Someone has to start to apologize, to create better atmosphere among ourselves. And I understand for everything what happened during the war, which was a failure from the people that belongs to the Serbian ethnic group. I had to apologize, even though I wasn't involved in these war cases, and even though I was always against war in favor of peaceful solution in the former Yugoslavia. And I did it. I did it in Srebrenica, I did it in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I did it in Vukovar, and after that, some of my counterparts, for example, Mr. Josipovic from Croatia, made the same gesture towards Serbian victims, and also that happened even in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And many years after I used to be president of Serbia, even today I'm under criticism because I did it. This is why I'm trying to explain reality in which we are living in the former Yugoslavia. And many people even today are very, very aggressive regarding what happened, and they do not want process of reconciliation. They would like to live separately from each other. They would like to live separately from Bosnia and Herzegovina, separately from Croatia, believing that this is only way of living with dignity and way of living in which, in accordance with our national interests. I have a totally opposite approach to the politics and to the future history, and this is why I'm advocating always totally different politics in our region. I'm advocating human rights. I'm advocating respecting different identities, even though very similar, but I'm respecting that kind of small differences. I'm always in favor of reconciliation process, but I truly believe that key issue and the foundation on every sustainable reconciliation process is to apologize for everything what some people from your ethnic group has been doing against the people that are member of different and the neighboring ethnic group. This is second very important thing that I would like to underline. And I truly believe that politics and philosophy of apologizing is crucially important in terms of reconciliation process. After apologizing, you are going to become able to understand better different culture, even small differences, and to understand significance of small differences, and not only to tolerate small differences, but especially to respect small differences, to respect different human beings, even human beings that are having very small differences in comparison with you. But we have to respect different human beings, all kinds of differences. I would like to share with you idea that we have to learn that in our school and our families. That will be very important if we can do something like that. That will be a significant contribution to our societies to become more civilized, more normal, and more able to prevent any conflict that is always threatening to every country, to every ethnic group, every individuals, to create new, very horrible and reality in which we can wake up almost every day. This is why how I'm introducing all of us in these topics that we have to discuss today.
Thank you. I'm gonna pass to Zoel to take it from here.
Yes.
Hello. Just before I go, I'd just like to remind participants that you can ask questions in the chat if you have any. President Tadic, thank you for being with us today. In your discussion, you spoke about something that I think is useful not only in diplomacy but also in everyday life generally. You spoke about the importance of apologizing in diplomacy for reconciliation. This is something that a lot of people lack even in smaller things in personal life. So how would you promote that as a positive, to people who don't really have that impression of apologizing, especially on that grand diplomatic scale?
This is not only a very important and good question, but also a very difficult question. Maybe you don't know, my background is psychology, and maybe this is why I'm insisting on apologizing in international diplomacy and the politics as a kind of cornerstone and the foundation of normal relations between countries and the people that were involved in the conflict. But if you're asking me whether majority of people accepting that as a general attitude, I can say no, unfortunately no. For people much more, for majority of the people this is my experience, is even easier to take very strict and very hard position regarding conflict. They do not want to go into the conflict resolution procedure because of believing that this is only way how to defend their own dignity. My approach is totally different, but totally opposite. I think that everyone is defending its own dignity only if everyone is able to make that kind of gesture, to apologize for negative things that man, that ethnic group, that country did towards other phenomena, other individuals, ethnic group, or state. And I think regarding our culture, regarding our common culture, if I'm talking about cultures, I have to say our, let's say, common heritage. I think that we have to organize real education for young people about what it means, why we are apologizing, and significance of apologizing. As I said to you, I introduced the not only gesture but philosophy of apologizing after war that happened in former Yugoslavia, after we had altogether more than 100,000 victims, as a normal gesture that is a precondition and for a really sustainable reconciliation process. But even today, after many years of that gesture I was committing, majority of the people are attacking on me and criticizing me because of that. I'm standing behind of that political and individual philosophy strongly, and I'm continuing to advocate that kind of gesture as the only normal way. But if you're asking me, is it going to be very difficult even in the future to explain such simple thing from my point of view? Yes, that is going to be very difficult even in the future, but especially not that difficult regarding personal relations, but even with the personal relations, but especially that is going to be difficult regarding international arena and international policy. I have to remind ourselves, for example, Belgium during the colonial system has been doing horrible things in Africa, in Congo, in Rwanda, and other countries. Even today, we have a horrible outcome in these countries regarding different ethnic groups living in this area on Africa because of scientists that came during the colonialism in Congo. Rwanda has been delivering the so-called scientific researches that people living there are so different. And one ethnic group is deserving better position and supreme position regarding other ethnic group. And that was a foundation of horrible atrocities that happened in the 20th century, at the end of the 20th century, among themselves. And I'm trying to explain to you that only a few years ago, some Belgian officials has been doing this gesture by apologizing for everything what happened during the colonial system in Congo and this part of Africa. Not many leaders, even after many decades, didn't do such a gesture, which is, from my point of view, extremely important to understand what was happened during the history, not recent, but long history, and how your leaders has been approaching to the issue of different identity, how those leaders or some historian leaders has been behaving in a critical moments of history, and this is very important for new generation to understand what happened and to understand why some people living in the very specific countries, for example, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, cannot understand real the role of significant countries in Europe nowadays and their role in Africa in such regions. Philosophy of apologizing is, from my point of view, extremely important reconciliation process and creating sustainable and normal situation in every country.
Thank you very much. That was a very well said response. Before we continue, I'd like to thank the president of RFK, Kerry Kennedy, for joining us today. And I'd like to read you her question. First of all, thank you for taking the time to join us. And
thank you.
Now I will read this. Some people say that the perpetrator must apologize before the victim can forgive. Others say that the power to forgive is always in the hands of the victim, no matter what the perpetrator does. How do you view forgiveness? Thank you.
This is not easy. I mean, to forgive about what happened. This is not easy. I mean, I'm using this former Yugoslavia example because we had the perpetrators, we had victims on all sides. Depend on historical situation. I mean, almost every one of us has been facing with that kind of experiences. I mean, I was living in the family where, for example, my mother lost her father. He was killed during the Second World War by Ustašija this is a Nazi and fascist movement from Croatia. He was a Serbian politician in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in that time, Bosnia has been part of Nazi Croatia, independent state of Croatia, which was ruled by Adolf Hitler and that kind of coalition. My grandfather was killed, and his brother was killed, and his daughter was killed. My mother survived, and very few members of our family in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I was growing up next to her, and she never told me that I have to hate Croats because of that. She was very strict in that respect by saying that Croats are our closest ethnic group and we are living together and we are going to live together. But the crime is not the characteristic of ethnic group. This is characteristic of individuals that are sometimes Serbs, sometimes Croat, sometimes Bosniaks or Americans, Russians, whatever. And that is very important. This is important regarding education and regarding forming normal personality, if we are talking about young people. But at the same time, if we are talking about elderly, if someone committed crime against you or some of your relatives, you have to be extremely strong and capable to forgive what happened and to put that in the wider context and to understand even sometimes criminals from other side. If we are talking about politics and political ethnic group, we have to approach to that issue by trying to understand that all war criminals are, yes, they are members of some ethnic groups, but they are first of all individuals, and we cannot blame whole ethnic groups and people about they war crime, and we have to accuse them and to bring them in the court. That is exactly what I was doing. As a president of Serbia, I was insisting to bring all fugitives from the International Court of Justice and in the Hague Tribunal, and finally I did it. And I think that court is the only institution that can decide who is a criminal, who is not criminal. But what I understood during my terms that I have to finish cooperation with the Hague Tribunal, which was institution of United Nations, and Serbia is a member state of United Nations, has to respect that kind of rules. And we did it as a country. As a president of my country, I was encouraging that process, and we finished cooperation with the Hague Tribunal, even though that was politically extremely difficult. But in that context, I was trying also to bring my Serbia in the arena of justice, but at the same time to help to the people in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina to forgive about what happened during the war in the former Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, not everyone in the former Yugoslavia, I'm talking about politicians, didn't behave, take this approach, and that created so many political tensions and especially towards politicians that are behaving in accordance with that kind of values and that kind of standards.
Thank you. For what I believe will be our final question for today, I'd like to reference a little more back to what we were talking about just earlier, and considering the truth of the matter that you spoke about how people are very unwilling to adopt this strategy of apology, and many are probably not willing to forgive. Where do you see Serbia in particular and the Balkans in general going? How do you see the political situation progressing within the next 10 to 15 years?
From the beginning of political changes we made in October 2000, when we overthrew Milosevic's regime, general and official strategy of our country was to become member state of European Union. And unfortunately, this process is going to be very slow. After kind of enthusiastic approach from European Union leaders until 2006, 2007, maybe 2008, because of economic difficulties triggered by global crisis, politics of or policy of enlargement started to be very unpopular in European Union, which means not many people in European Union were able even to talk about that. And for majority of them was politically much more useful to start to stop down communication regarding enlargement. But that wasn't possible to block enlargement process immediately, but day by day, that process was under kind of cancellation in reality, even though rhetorically, European Union was stated to be open for enlargement process. But that process was very slow, very slow, very slow, slower every year. And nowadays, this is 2021, 21 years after democratic changes in my country, we are still on the pro-European path. Even a new government in Serbia formed by former Milosevic coalition parties is keeping our strategic orientation, but unfortunately, I have to say only verbally, not in reality. But this is very useful for some European politicians that are following an agenda of enlargement fatigue in their own countries, that are also verbally supporting enlargement process, but that process is going to be slowed down every year. And this is very difficult situation. I'm always trying to define the current situation. We are approaching towards European Union, countries that are not member states, not only Serbia, but also Bosnia, Montenegro, and Macedonia in very asymptotic way. This is curve that is going to be closer and closer and closer and closer to the final goal, but never really touching this final goal. And this is that kind of approach is a very unfortunately acceptable not only for leaders in our countries in the Western Balkans that are not really pro-European leaders, but also this is very useful for European leaders of European Union that are facing with the problem with their electorate. If they are going to start before elections to talk about enlargement, they're going to lose 10-15% of voters, and from that the reason I'm really very much concerned regarding future position of my country, Serbia, and other regional countries. Why I'm very much concerned? This is not only because of our national interest, but this is because of even European interests. If Western Balkans is not going to be fully integrated within European Union, I mean, all of us are going to be faced with the many problems. Balkans was always able to create many tensions, even troubles, because of diversities and complexity that existing on the Balkans. And if this space is without real influence and presence of European Union with institutions and stability and real stable development, some other global players are going to come on the Western Balkans, and that is reality in which we are living. I was trying to appeal on my European Union counterparts to avoid that kind of scenario by saying if you are not going to integrate Western Balkans as soon as possible, Russia and Turkey are going to come. But nowadays we have a third player in international arena. This is China, and Russia, Turkey, and China are really very much present in the region of the Western Balkans, sometimes even more than European Union. This is not very positive outcome of everything what happened in terms of integration process in past few years.
I see. Moving a little past the more broad scale international diplomatic side of this, I was wondering if you look at, more the younger generations, more within nations, I would have to ask you how you promote peace, reconciliation, and this kind of healing among youth, particularly after these atrocities that you spoke of took place in the former Yugoslavia.
Whenever I'm traveling abroad by taking a position of interlocutor, facilitator regarding reconciliation process, with my experience from former Yugoslavia, as someone who started this reconciliation process after war happened, I'm using very simple examples, and I'm saying that if you are taking position of young politician or young man who is against reconciliation process, this is for sure that you are going to live in a difficulties in extent 20, 30 years. Reconciliation process is not only moral duty, a normal approach of the normal human beings, but this is also very rational approach. If you are living within tensions with your neighbors in some house, you are going to live in the troubles for decades, and this is not sustainable. If you are living in the troubles with your neighbors in political terms, you are going to be not that developed country, you are not going to have enough foreign direct investments in your country. Even your entrepreneurs are not going to invest in opening new working spaces. Your economy is going to suffer, your existence is going to suffer, and that is going to be your reality all your life. In that respect, reconciliation process, I'm insisting on apologizing as a first step of reconciliation process because of moral ground, but also because of being rational, is a key precondition, conditio sine qua non of a normal existence and normal development, even fast development. And finally, when I was in an official visit with some international institutions in two regions, that was the South Caucasus and Myanmar, with OSCE and the Club de Madrid, the club formed by more than 100 former global democratically elected leaders, I was explaining to young people, especially young politicians in South Caucasus. I met young Azeris and young the Armenians. And I was explaining to them in Georgia, that was meeting in Georgia, that kind of simple approach and morally very important approach is finally also very rational and useful approach regarding their expectations about their own lives. I did it also in Myanmar, but unfortunately, I see that we don't have a real sustainability regarding peace and reconciliation process in these two parts of the regions of the world. In South Caucasus, we had a kind of war, but very short, fortunately, but a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan regarding Nagorno-Karabakh. But in Myanmar, we have once again the worst scenario that dictatorship is coming to be a reality in this beautiful country, and we have tensions on the street. But we cannot give up, even though we are facing with the difficulties. We have to understand, to insist on the reconciliation process, and to explain and to explain, and to travel in the conflict zones and to explain and to explain and to insist on that. This is why I think that leaders with such experience and such political philosophy are very important nowadays in global arena in that kind of diplomacy.
Thank you very much. I believe, yes. I think I'd like to say, first of all, thank you for coming to this, and thank you for speaking with us today. I think in light of everything that you've been talking about, especially about your first segment about the importance of apology, I think that that's an important takeaway for everyone watching today, people my age, people older, people younger, and I really feel that that's something that can be taken beyond just the diplomatic sphere, and I think it's a lesson that a lot of people can learn. I think that a lot of the things that you push for in terms of human rights are a lot of things that many people can push for in their own lives as well. And I think that's a sign that they're very important things to do. Um, but thank you all for coming. Thank you to our attendees today. I appreciate you all for coming, and I will hand it back to Karen. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoel. And I'd echo that. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Zoel, again for facilitator and monitoring the Q&A. Always so great to see you. Social distance, virtual studying from home. So thank you. Robshan, thank you for this continued partnership. It really is so critically important for the students and educators we work with to have this perspective. And President Tadic, your experience, your perspective, your thoughtful, honest views on how we can all collectively move forward despite what our histories have given us, taught us. It's just so critically important for all of us to know this and to take from your talk this morning really important lessons on how we all can move forward to make the world more just, more fair, and that is absolutely the goal of this partnership, to increase this international dialogue and understanding, and to ground our work and who we are in assuring and affirming, promoting, and protecting human rights for all members of our human family. So thank you so much for contributing to that in such an inspirational and thoughtful way. As I said when I started, meeting you a few years ago and then a couple years ago is truly a highlight of my life as a human rights activist and human rights educator. I look forward to the opportunity to be back in the Western Balkans and bringing human rights education to our partners there and with our partners there. So thank you all. Be safe, take good care, and go in peace. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.